Get ready for the greatest roast of all time, the Roast of Tom Brady, a Netflix live event happening May 5th. Hosted by Kevin Hart, the 7-time world champion gets his cleats held to the fire by famous friends and frenemies on an unforgettable night where everything is fair game. Tune in on May 5th at 5 p.m. Pacific time for the Roast of Tom Brady, live only on Netflix.
You ready?
Showtime.
On May 3rd, summer starts with The Fall Guy.
Let's do it later.
Let's drink a spicy margarita.
Make some bad decisions.
Yes!
Audiences are falling in love with the most entertaining film of the year.
Fall Guy.
Fall Guy?
Fall guy.
That's what the poster said.
See Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt in the movie critics say exists to make you happy.
Trying to make it out?
Nope.
Because I don't either. It's not what I'm into right now.
What are you into?
Talking.
Yeah.
The Fall Guy. Only in theaters May 3rd. Rated PG-13.
Come meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shop at C70. No report from Alan Medlock this week. We didn't make connections, and I think he's about to wrap up his season coming up. Last week, we had half of a podcast team join us with Nate in Talk About Birds. This week, we have half of a podcast team joining us. We've got Ben Godar from Cardinals Off Day. Ben, it's nice to have you, even if we don't have the other Ben in town.
Well, it's always nice to be here and chat with you. And I know Ben wishes he could be here. He had a family thing going on tonight, so he can't join us.
Yeah, I feel a little bit safer not having to worry about mentioning the manager and triggering some sort of reflex on Ben. So I think that that's always an issue with y'all. It's always fun to listen to y'all uh, on your show, and y'all tend to do it a little bit more regularly. I guess that's part of the early season, right? You're almost a weekly show now.
Well, I think that at one of these points when they balance the schedule and whatnot, I think didn't they? It seems like they added in more off days as well.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think at a certain point they did do that, and they did not consult us before they did that, and I wish they had because part of the reason, Ben and I used to write when he was a site manager at VB, he wrote a lot. I wrote just once a week, but honestly, I kind of got to the point where I was like, I just don't want to, file something every single week anymore. And between us, I feel like it was Ben's original idea, the off day thing. But part of the allure was, of course, that like, well, there's an off day like many weeks, most weeks, but not every week. But yeah, this beginning of the season, it's been every single week. So we've been like you. We've been doing a weekly podcast. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it takes a bit, and you look forward to, I'm sure, what I think it's May or June, where there's only like 3 off days. So
Oh,
hopefully
music to
that.
my ears, music to my ears. So, and honestly, I mean, the biggest part of it, of course, is just that I'm lazy. But
Mm,
uh, it is also kind of nice sometimes to have. It's like you need a little bit of time to kind of have something to talk
right.
about. So,
Hmm.
the worst is like every now and then they'll have like, like a Monday and then a Thursday, or something, or just every now and then
Right.
they'll be two like really close together, and it's like, well, what what did we learn in the last 2 days? Nothing. So,
Yeah. Being that y'all do start out with that, what have you learned segment? That, yeah, if it's been what we learned, it's been 3 days.
yeah,
That's good. When you
exactly.
can get a couple of weeks, then you can actually have a sample of stuff to actually discuss. So,
Yeah. Well, that's the hope.
um,
So,
yeah, that's the hope. Um, we could talk about this team and talk about them, I think I wouldn't say glowingly. We're not going to be glowingly talking about a team that's under 500, but I feel like we can talk about them maybe with a little bit of a sense of relief over the last week or so. This team, I know, 2 weeks ago, I know our show, maybe y'all's as well. We're comparing them maybe not favorably with last year's team. They were same record, same type of things. But over the last little bit, it does feel like this team has, if not turned a corner, at least started to.
Yeah, I mean, I am cautiously optimistic about that. I mean, before the season started, I did think this was an improved team. I didn't think
Mhm.
it was. I was very concerned that it wasn't improved enough, to win the
Right.
division. But when you compare it to last year, obviously the offense is really fine last year. The pitching, of course, was a disaster, and so, you come to this season and the bullpen is just very good. I really don't have a lot of critiques about the bullpen. I think they, built a very solid bullpen. And the starting rotation, well, they got Sonny Gray. you know, and and so far I don't know, Lynn has had his run scoring has been, better than his performance, and Gibson's been, kind of okay-ish. I mean, they were, I think they definitely were upgrades from some of the people they had last year, but they were not like huge upgrades. So I don't know where that's going to shake out over the whole course of this season. And really, in this early season, the issue kind of has been the offense more so. And so
Mhm.
you just kind of have to ask, like, well, is that do I think that they've really the offense is so much worse than I thought they were, or is this just kind of a number of players on a rough patch? And I think that's more likely what it is, because this offense, and even if you're really worried about Goldie, although of course he's been hitting better in the last few days, or Arenado, who
Right.
again has been kind of slowly a little bit better, right? Whoever you're worried about, there are a lot of guys, I mean, there's Newt Bar, and there's Gorman, and there's a number of players on this team that you can feel confident in producing. So, not all of them are going to, but it feels like enough of them will. So, I mean, I'm really more or less in the same place I was at the beginning of the year. Are they going to be enough better than they were last year to move the needle? Because they were very bad last year.
Right.
And so we'll see. But yeah, the more recent results have definitely been more promising, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't win game 13 till May 10th last year. So at least in that regard, they're ahead of the game. Barring some sort of collapse over the last bet, they'll stay ahead of that schedule. But I think you're right. It's I guess the real fear, one of my fears at least, is that the Cardinals are getting maybe above expectation pitching from guys like Lynn and Gibson, especially.
Yep.
Um, and they've not been able to capitalize on it because of weak offense. And so, about the time the offense kicks in, is the pitching staff going to come back to normal, and we're going to be kind of in the same position, just reversed? I don't know. I mean, I hope not. I hope that there's a sweet spot, especially of where the offense can score enough runs and the pitching staff will pitch well. But it's hard to know, right? I mean, we're not even a month into the season, and it's I don't think it's all smoke and mirrors for a couple of those guys, but how much of it is, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I mean, Sonny Gray is a huge upgrade to this team,
Hmm.
and what a joy to watch pitch. And he's the one guy that you're like, all right, so it's a Sonny Gray day. We're winning today, right? You kind of go in
Right.
there with that level of confidence, because you know that he's at least going to put you in a really strong position. Of course, when the team scores zero, you're still not going to win, just due to the rules of baseball. But
Why is he not allowing negative runs,
yeah,
Bill? That's what I want to know.
right. Yeah. Well, he's going to have to win some of these games, but um, so that's an upgrade. I mean, they have not had
Hmm.
that for some time, really, and so that's very exciting. I think it's really that half Flaherty season is the last time you had
Probably. Yeah.
somebody kind of performing at that level. But yeah, the rest of the guys, I mean, it's honestly the same kind of thing that they've had for the last several years now. It's a bunch of guys. Nobody has electric strikeout stuff. So they're gonna throw it. They're gonna be around the zone. Not gonna give up a ton of walks, but so some days they're gonna not give up enough hard contact, or the hard contact's gonna go to defenders, and they'll have a strong 7 innings or something, but they're definitely going to get shelled too. so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think every one of those other guys, it's kind of a dice roll.
Yeah, we've seen that with Miles Michaelis, right? I mean, Miles has been shelled a couple of times, and then he comes out Friday night and pitches a significantly better game. I don't think anybody expected that.
Yeah,
And then about the time you start to think, well, okay, he could do that, then it won't go his way again. So, um,
yeah,
yeah, you know, I guess the biggest thing, and maybe you referenced the bullpen. Do you think that's maybe at least some part of this, resurgence is the fact you don't have to worry about stretching a starter because the bullpen's going to be able to lock it down versus last year where you just had no idea what was going to happen when people
yeah.
came in?
Yeah, I mean, last season you reached a point where you had like total system failure, right?
Hmm.
Because you had you had starters so consistently that could not give you innings, and so they had to tax that bullpen so much. So the bullpen was bad last year. A number of those guys had individually bad performances, but I have a hard time, that's one thing I don't blame Ollie for, really, bullpen usage last year, because I think
Right.
these days it was just like who even do we have, right? And whoever they
Hmm.
had, kind of pitched. So I mean, this season it is going a little more to kind of the plan that they put forth, which is starters who are going to go deeper into games. And we've seen, like, from Gibson had that start where he got absolutely shelled, but just kept on throwing. Starters going deeper, and so generally when it's time to turn it over to the bullpen, it's more that way you like your bullpen, where you're kind of like, okay, it's this guy and then this guy, and then it
Yeah.
feels very planned out and doesn't feel like a kind of panic situation. So I mean, that's definitely helping, and just the general quality of the bullpen has been upgraded quite a bit this season as well.
It's also, I guess, beyond the upgrade in quality, they've obviously taken the kid gloves off of Ryan Helsley, right? I mean, he's pitched in every game that they've won so far. And he's pitched on some back-to-back days. I think he's pitched both games of this series. We must have. So that's a change too. I mean, we saw some
Mhm.
iffy stuff out of Helsley some last year too, but being able to go to him like you would a normal closer, I guess, and not have to worry about, okay, he pitched this day, so he can't pitch like the rest of the series.
Yeah.
That just helps the back of the bullpen significantly.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, the more he's available, obviously that's huge for the team. I know I've heard him say that they're only gonna, only 1 inning outings this year. They definitely were pushing him multiple innings more
Yeah.
last season, etc. And I know they felt like that was kind of an issue for him, that maybe led to some fatigue, or maybe he didn't bounce back as well from those things. Um, I feel like that's one of those things you do kind of just have to listen and trust what they say. There's just
Yeah.
days where they're like, yeah, this guy's not available, and it's like, okay, I mean, I guess that guy's not available. So because it's a real thing, and so hopefully, Helsley has been around for a while now. He's had some injury issues, but hopefully, kind of through that, he knowing himself and the team knowing what he can do, they're going to be able to maximize what they can get out of him. Because he's just absolutely filthy. I mean, he has the best stuff on the team, and it's not particularly close. I mean, Sonny Gray is pretty good as well, but you've also got Kittredge, has been just lights out, and Romero, gives you really really strong performance, and that's three pretty solid guys coming out of there. Ryan Fernandez has done okay. A lot of these guys have done all right, and
Hmm.
so yeah, I've got feeling good about the bullpen. That's definitely the part of the team that I kind of feel the most confident in at the moment.
Yeah. we talk a lot about trades that didn't go the Cardinals' way, and that's fair. Um, but I don't know that we have maybe given enough emphasis to the fact that the Cardinals got JoJo Romero for Edmundo Sosa in a deal that at the time just looked like they were giving away Sosa so they could let Paul DeYoung play.
Yeah.
Um, they got a really quality asset out of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know that Gallegos has not exactly been himself this season, but
Hmm.
contrary to what a lot of people were wringing their hands about, 1 year after it, I think the Cardinals won the Luke Voigt trade, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
And so yeah, no, you're right, and I think some of that is just our screwed up psychology as fans, right? And so like you remember the things that didn't go your way are like it's like a personal slight. So
yeah, absolutely.
you hold on to those things for sure. I don't know how many like when I go on social media, I feel like every Cardinals fan is tracking every single former outfielder the Cardinals have had, just waiting for one of them to like go 3 for 4 with a double and a home run. So,
Yeah,
and,
well,
and and
I
and
remember.
most of them do that like a few times a week, which is problematic. But my point.
Yeah, that gets a little. That gets a little bit of problem. I think about when you say that. I think about. I think there was it may have been in George Will's Minute Work, but it was talking about Tony La Russa when he was starting to, they were really starting to track stuff, probably the forerunners of some of the stat stuff that we see now. And it was always, look, you remember when the guy hit a double down the line that beat you, but you don't remember the 10 ground outs to this side that, and how you pitched him there. So keeping track of all that stuff instead of just, remembering what burned you was a big thing. And I think that's kind of like you're saying with fan base. We don't always track, the ground outs, the things that went our way. But the ones that don't seem to don't go our way quite spectacularly, I guess.
Yeah, and the Cardinals had a really unprecedented run of probably the first about the first 10 years of Mo's tenure in the front office. I mean, they just did not lose trades. I mean, it's
Mm,
always a little fishy when you get into the winning or losing a trade, but you would be hard pressed to point to a trade over that entire span that really really the Cardinals were dramatically on the rough end of that. So you know, when they had, when they had a few trades, Sandy Alcantara, of course, and some of the, when they started to have some that didn't pan out, you were like, well, I mean, obviously it was going to happen to some point, but it does seem like, in those years since then, there've been more than you would like to see, where it didn't feel like the Cardinals, came out ahead. But I know something Ben and I talk a lot about is it really seems like the organization, player development just feels like it kind of lags behind so many other
yeah,
organizations. That's I think one place we see it, because whether they are guys that are maybe drafted and brought all the way through the system, or guys that are kind of traded into the system, you just don't see, it doesn't seem like you see a lot of guys take like big steps forward. Or guys who come in from other systems and then suddenly, they unlock something and they're a new player here. So I
yeah,
think that's part of the issue too, is, I mean, there's guys, some of these guys that we're all thinking about, that the Cardinals traded away, they were not the players they are now at the time the Cardinals traded away. It took some other organization or just some work the player did, at some private facility or whatever. But something that happened, to kind of turn them into the great players that frustrate us every night now.
yeah. I always think back to what Kyle Reese was saying about Randy Rosarena when he was in the system, and it was he was always playing because he didn't make it enough money. He was always trying to support his family, so he would play winter league ball and all that stuff. And it really was the pandemic shutdown that was
Mhm.
the first time he could, not play and really, work out and get some rest and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. And without that, would he have ever been the player that we've seen over the last, 4 years? I don't
Mm.
know, but I
Right.
think that that's the kind of stuff that you know they don't know that at the time. When they traded him, they weren't
Mhm.
planning on a pandemic, as far as I know. I mean,
Right.
it would be really weird. Um, so
What did Mo know, and when did he know it?
So yeah, but I think you're right on some of that player development stuff, and I think that leads us into probably one of the bigger topics from this week, in the fact that Jordan Walker was sent back to AAA, and has struggled obviously offensively in the major leagues, and between the offense itself not going well and his own struggles, you know, it all kind of came down to that perfect storm where he was going to get sit down, but we saw this again last year. It kind of worked then, but there's only so many times you can do this. And I don't know, what were your thoughts when you heard that Walker was going to Memphis?
Yeah, I mean, kind of complex thoughts. I was really expecting this to be a breakout season for Jordan Walker because he really had kind of a breakout second half last year. So
Yeah,
I was expecting, or at least hopeful, that that was going to happen, and it just absolutely hasn't. So on the one hand, I mean, the way he was hitting, I don't think they had a choice really at that point, but to send him down. But a point that Ben has made on our show is, and I agree with, is like why, like why don't we have the coaching or the kind of facility at the major league level to help him work through this,
mhm,
right? This is the second year in a row he's got to go down to the minors and do that. And okay, I understand. There, always hear about like, well, it's a lower pressure environment, and da 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 da. And yes, that stuff is true, but again, it's like what's going on with our coaching that there's not someone there that can help him through this. I mean, honestly, of course, the entire team underperforming offensively for the first month of the season raises
yeah,
some questions about that.
right.
It's always a real black box thing to start speculating about what coaching can and can't do. We don't really know, but
Mhm.
but it's disappointing to see a player like him have to go down again. But um, it worked last year, and so hopefully, and it's the same kind of thing, right? It's mostly
Yeah.
the ground balls, and not line drives or hard hit fly balls. So it's basically the same issue he had last season. So hopefully they kind of know how to fix it and can just turn it around more quickly.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit of a confidence thing to go down there and have some success. I think I don't again, they're totally different players, they're totally different situations, but I find it very interesting to compare him and Mason Wynn. The Cardinals, Mason Wynn came out of spring training last year, and I think if there had been a spot, there could have been a strong argument for him to go ahead and go to St. Louis.
Hmm.
But he went to Memphis. He's played all year, and didn't come up until late August. Got his feet wet, and then has had really successful run this year. And
Yeah.
I just wonder if that establishment of a foundation at AAA might not have been in Jordan Walker's best interest as well. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it very well may have been. I think we don't know, and I'm sure that there's players that is essential for. There's others that maybe it's less
Mhm.
essential for. So, I mean, I'm kind of forgiving, and I like when they are somewhat aggressive. I feel like why not, right? These guys are
Right.
they're aging every day. So,
Mhm.
and their sole purpose is to produce for the St. Louis Cardinals, right? So I'm generally like it when they kind of give him a shot. The other thing I'd say about Mason Wynn is like, I mean, I know he said he got his feet wet. He was bad. I mean, he was bad,
Mhm. Right.
you know, last year. I mean, his didn't hit a lick, but of course they were already out of it at that point, so it didn't matter. So that was a
Mhm.
nice, comfortable position for him to be bad in, because again, like every player, Albert Pujols is a unicorn in so many ways, but one of them is just the arriving fully formed, right?
Right.
Uh, Mike Trout, Aaron Judge, go down the list. Like most of these guys, their first time they came up actually, wasn't so great, and they went down, right? So now going down twice, like Walker has, definitely disappointing, but he's also so young, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I know. I think we all feel like, yeah, eventually he's going to be back, and it's just kind of a bummer that it's not working out of the gate.
And I guess, I mean, baseball around, it used to be. that they didn't really want to bring up a guy until they did. If he came up, they didn't want to send him back down. And we're seeing around. I mean, this week Jackson Holiday gets optioned back down too after just what 30 something at bats in the major leagues. It doesn't feel like there's that taboo, at least from ownership or front office side. I don't know what the players think about it, but it's not this thing that, man, we can't admit that we shouldn't have called him up. They're just perfectly willing to go ahead and send him back down.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, that was a thing, of course, organizations used to say, right? But it was
Hmm.
always, you also, you saw them treat different players in different ways, because we've heard
Sure.
the thing
Yeah.
forever about like with the real kind of blue chippers, right? Like, well, they don't want to bring them up until they're going to play every day, right?
Hmm.
Whereas there's a lot of other guys that maybe they don't have as much, don't put as much stock in, who it's like, oh yeah, bring them up, send them down, bring them up, send them down,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, it varies. And then the reality is some of those guys who, I mean, I think about a guy like Paul DeYoung, right? When Paul DeYoung
Hmm.
was called up, nobody was like, all right, clear the deck, Paul DeYoung is going to start every day. But Paul DeYoung, while Cardinal fans may not remember it, was very good, you know first few seasons. And just, he was essentially like a, back of the bench guy, kind of fill-in guy, and just played so well that he stuck around. So, like, that's a thing that can happen too.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can have a Jordan Walker or a Mason Wynn who you're really trying to like craft what you feel like is the perfect path forward. And just the way that you do that, it doesn't stick, or it doesn't stick the first time through. So, it's kind of one of those things.
Yeah, and you do wonder. I mean, you remember when Colton Wong was up.
Yeah.
There was one of those years where he got sent to Memphis mainly because he wasn't hitting, but nobody else was either. And
Yeah.
you wonder if this lineup was producing, if the Cardinals would have said, okay, we can afford to let Jordan Walker get out there, and we can tinker with stuff, and
Yeah.
his at bats don't matter as much when we're scoring 5, 6 runs a game than when we're trying to struggle to score three.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I've been thinking about Colton Wong with Jordan Walker, because
Hmm.
just it feels similar in terms of some of the, like, we know this is an excellent player, but we're kind of having some up and down. Now, I will say, I think the circumstances are pretty different. I think Wong, it was really just that his manager was, a fool who had no, also just had no confidence in him. I mean, do you
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
Colton Wong in the outfield? Like,
yeah.
I mean, geez, how did we live through that, Daniel? I mean, like, we've got like one of the best defensive middle infielders in the league. Like, let's put him in left field, where, having not played at all. I mean, anyway, just crazy stuff.
Yeah,
But that felt like what a lot of it was with Colton Wong, of course. And then you had, ultimately you had the front office stepping in and basically like clearing everything out, being like, you have to
hmm,
play him. So, I mean, that's not what's going on here. I think obviously Ali Marmol wants to play Jordan Walker, right? He wants a, Jordan Walker that's producing. And Walker's just had this inconsistent ability to, get the ball in the air, against major league pitching. So
yeah. And unlike Colton Wong, who was replaced by the shell of Mark Ellis, um, you know, there were guys like Alec Burleson that are young and that have had a little bit more success this year, even. And you want to get those kind of guys in the lineup, but you don't want Jordan Walker to sit on your bench. So, I mean, you're
yeah,
right. The situations are different, but I have thought the same thing. You just kind of get that, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes at times, and I think that's
yeah,
what we're
yeah,
getting
yeah, I like that.
here. Yeah. So, I'm trying to decide where we want to go next. You're right. Sonny Gray has been incredible, um, but when you look at this team overall, are you really that? I know you. I haven't heard your last show, so if I'm walking over any of the stuff, I apologize.
No.
But what are you thinking long term? Not only necessarily for this year. I guess it does depend, because if you think this year's not going to go well, what does that mean for next year?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and we did have, someone pose that, pretty much that exact question to us on this most recent episode. And I'm pretty I'm pretty down on the organization overall.
Mhm.
Um, I really feel like the that inability to develop players and especially pitchers. It's just so glaring on the pitching side. Um, I think that has just is really the root of so much of what's wrong in this organization. I don't think they're drafting particularly well either. Since that magical 2020 draft, they're just back to drafting these like polished college arms. And I saw a story the other day, like it's exciting news, like Cooper Jerpy's like fastball was like touching 90 again. And it's just like, oh my God, like really, this is the guy we drafted first overall. Like
Right,
fantastic.
right.
So, um, so what I'm kind of, and so I think in coming into this season, what the team did was they said, well, we're going to acquire some veteran pitchers to kind of paper over. And obviously, starting at the trade deadline last year, they kind of tried to restock some prospects, but just with what they were trading at the last season, it's not like they got you know great prospects necessarily. You got like a Takoa Roby who is like, oh, this guy's got really good stuff, so maybe we can kind of dream on that, but hasn't necessarily put it together. You've got like a, Sem Robersa who has just a really interesting kind of mix, but like also just looks like he does not have a major league fastball, which like I know we're all throwing breaking balls more, but definitely wonder like can that play?
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll find out. So anyway, they kind of tried to paper over this problem of they can't their player development, their player acquisition are kind of broken. And the thing is, like you can't really paper over that. So they have to be fixing that stuff. And a lot of that is really internal. And so I mean, we don't necessarily know what all they're doing. So, maybe there are strides being made there. I tend to think there need to be some pretty significant personnel changes within the organization to make that happen, because it just seems like it's such a pervasive issue that they just need different people to kind of repair that. One, and actually it was, I think Ben made the point on our show as we addressed this. I think the one thing that could kind of help get them through is, if Takoa Roby and if Tink Hence both were to become decent major league starting pitchers, right? They don't even have to be like, number one ace material, but that in and of itself could really help them basically buy them even a few more years, and maybe enough time that, like, yeah, if they really kind of turn around the drafting and the development now, um, they're not going to have that big downturn, because that's the thing. Like draft, so when you say you need to fix your draft and development, it's not like even if you fix that today, right? Which, again, what does fix it mean? But it's fixed today. Well, you're not going to see those players for 2-3 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned because I do think that it just feels organizational. It feels like the Cardinals need to be an organization that generates cost controlled, high quality talent. And that's what they've done for 20 plus years here. I mean, that's really one of the bedrock fundamentals of DeWitt ball, and it's not happening right now. Especially on the pitching side. The offense still, some okay results there, but yeah. So I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. What are you at, Daniel? Are you how optimistic are you beyond this year?
I mean, I think there's a lot to what you say there, and I agree because even with an successful 2024, and I mean, I'm not talking like a World Series, but even just a return to the postseason, you do wonder how they then address this, because do you bring Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson back on their option years and hope to run it back? That doesn't sound like a good idea.
Hmm.
But then you have a lot of pitchers. So you're right. I think this is a big year for Roby, and whether you can get anything out of reverse and hints and all that kind of stuff. And I guess it also depends. I mean, this is a big draft that they have coming up, and do they get a guy in the first round that's a quick mover or something like that? But it does feel like they're just kind of in this kind of stuck themselves in a no man's land that they're going to have to do what they don't want to do and spend a lot of money to try to, like you said, paper over this idea of a lack of development. And it is surprising that the Cardinals have gotten to this point because, as you said, they built their success on that, especially on pitching. I mean, for a while there, I mean, you remember they were all these pitchers were coming up. You know, that's one of the reasons they could trade it an Alcantara and Gallen because they felt like they had so many pitchers they couldn't use them, but they couldn't develop a hitter to save their life. And
Yeah.
somewhere along the way, that shifted a little bit. And I don't know how they get it back because I feel like you can always go out and buy hitting if you have to, but you know, to pay the prices for good pitching, as we've seen with trying to bring in Sonny Gray, and Sonny Gray came in I think cheaper than anybody really expected. Um, that's just not something that this organization, and I don't think any organization wants to do,
Right.
because you see the big contracts and they don't pan out because of injury or whatever the case may be. Very rarely do they pan out. So you don't want to do that, but I don't know that they're going to have a lot of option going forward if they can't get some sort of development
Yeah, 100%. They won't do that either. I mean, they will
going.
not sign a huge free agent uh, starting pitcher contract. I mean, that's just one like
Yep.
one of my resolutions to myself this year, Daniel, is to not get mad at the Cardinals for being the Cardinals. And because there are things that are just core DeWitt, operational DNA. That's just how they do business. And so every offseason when people are like, oh, Justin Verlander's on the market, or whoever it is, right? It's just like,
Right.
folks, like, don't spend any time considering this. This is not going to happen. They don't do this because, yeah, as you said, the free agent pitchers they're very expensive, and they're less reliable than free agent offensive players. So they won't do that. So yeah, there really isn't a fix if they don't have some guys coming through the organization there. And I do think people talk about spending. They have a reasonably expensive rotation, the Cardinals do,
Mm.
because these are all free agent guys. And yeah, none of them are like top of the market, but most teams have at least a couple kind of cost controlled guys, maybe some guys that are pre-arb, right? That's not true with any of these guys. They went out and they you know shopped for all these guys, right? They chose Steven Matz and they're paying him money, right? And so they're just not getting great return on these investments.
Yeah, and that is part of the problem for when you're shopping in the Dr. Thunder section
Yep.
of your local grocery store. You know, you may.
Thank you for throwing Dr. Thunder
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a key part of your show. I don't think you could get past without it. But
in.
I mean, if you may be spending a little less, but what you're getting is less too. And it's either go for the big things or bring in these young guys and see what they can do. And they don't really have that. So I guess it would be interesting if they can get to a rotation of Roby and Hintz and maybe a reverse and maybe a Graceffo comes in. I mean, if you got three or four of these homegrown guys, or even just two of them in your rotation, that brings costs down. And then what do you do around that? Who knows? Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. And go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, they've got a few years of Sonny Gray, right? So if you've got
Hmm.
Sonny Gray, and then you've got two homegrown guys, that really changes the complexion of things a lot, because then if you're like your kind of last two pieces you have in your rotation are a Lance Lynn or a Kyle Gibson, on their club option year, or kind of a something like that, or somebody else of that vintage, that's kind of fine, right? The problem has been just that they've had like, entire rotations of that, right? And Michaelis is the same, kind of in the same boat too, right? So,
Hmm.
and the other thing too is, there's just no depth, and I mean,
Yeah.
we had, Gray was injured, but we were lucky it was only whatever it was, a week and a half or so.
Hmm.
But like, if you lose one of these guys, man, Daniel, like, think about who's starting games for you then, right? It's Zach Thompson, it's Andre Palante. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
it gets rough in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's one of those things we talked about all winter, and then when Sonny Gray went down, we kind of reiterated this rotation looks better because of Sonny Gray, but it goes right back to last year
Yeah.
if he's out for any length of time. Um, and yeah, I that's it is a problem. And I think maybe the other good thing about having a couple of guys that are homegrown at the back of that rotation that we haven't seen in the last couple of years is, when you have those guys, especially penciled in, you at least have the freedom to go out and get a Jordan Montgomery or something like that because you have a spot in your rotation for him, in quotes. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. No,
when
that's
you have all those veterans, you can't. I mean, at least most not going to. But I also think he has a point that a guy that wants to pitch, he may think he can beat these out, but there's also there's contracts and all this other stuff, and it's like I can go over here and not have to worry about all
yeah, no, you're right on both counts. And yeah, they have had homegrown guys in their rotation the last few years, but it's been like Hudson and Woodford, right?
that.
I mean, it's they're not good. It's they've been, they're and that's, truly that's what Libertor, Palante, Thompson. I mean, they, and again, hey, I would love to see one of those guys really take a step forward. But as I sit here today, I see, Jake Woodford 2.0, 3.0,
Yeah.
4.0, right? Kind of looks like, what they have there. Flaherty obviously was a guy that came through the system and, you know, was performed excellently for a fairly short period of time and then just never could quite get back there. So, that, yeah, that kind of happens too. But yeah, to your second point, you're absolutely right. When they have a 5-man rotation of all of these, veteran guys, they can't, there's not a lot of options beyond that. But again, you can't just keep signing guys, both because
Exactly.
like that, there's not enough, there's not that much talent out there. The Cardinals aren't going to spend that kind of money. You really need you need guys coming through your system. So, yeah,
Yeah, and I think especially, and we touched on this a minute ago, but I think that makes this year's draft so important. And again, getting the talent in, we have to figure out how to develop it, which we've said is an issue. But just the fact that they're drafting so high up, they should be able to bring in at least higher quality raw material, if you want to put it that way, than they have been when they're drafting 18th, 19th, 20th, and they can't
yeah,
squander that.
yeah. Can I be honest with you? I'm terrified.
Hmm.
I'm terrified of them drafting with the 7th pick. I don't think they know what to do with it. like,
Yeah.
I mean, I hope they do, but like, they have just been built for so long to, whether it's the polished college pitchers or, we're going to take this senior early because we know we can sign him under slot. And then we're going to take,
Hmm.
kind of a guy who maybe wasn't going to get drafted later, but try to snag him over slot. They have some moves. They have some moves they've executed, but it's all these kind of like drafting later on moves. And
Hmm.
when you're up that high, and you might have like just some really strong talent. I'm going to be honest. I am terrified they're going to draft the most polished college pitcher is exactly who they're who they're going to get with that 7th pick. So they're just going to get like a Cooper Jerpy reserve, basically. Is
Hmm.
the like a finer version of the kind of stuff they've been drafting the last few seasons.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a very reasonable concern. Um, I think that Randy Flores built his reputation on that 2020 draft, which was excellent. Obviously, has
Yeah.
a chance to even get better if Ian Bedell can make it to the major leagues. Um, but since then, I'm not saying that he's coasted on it because I think he's done some work, and we'll see what like Chase Davis how he comes out when he's still only had a year of development, stuff like that. But it hasn't necessarily lived up to the heights that you might think it would have after 2020. So, yeah, I think this is a key draft for him as well. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's been talk about him as a potential replacement for Mo, but if
Yeah.
this doesn't work out, I don't think that goes anywhere.
I think that talk died out a year or two ago. I don't hear that much anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, what a crapshoot the draft, right? Like
Mm,
you never know. So it's not, to me, it's not so much just that we haven't really seen many kind of impact players in a lot of these drafts, but I just feel like what they're going for doesn't even really seem very promising. You know what I mean? And it's just,
yeah.
again, I keep coming back to the polished college arms and just just these like really like high. I mean, honestly, it's just a high floor, maybe, but like low ceiling. It's like Zach Thompson. I mean, that was the thing when they drafted Thompson, right? Everybody said, "Oh, this might be the guy who can be in the major leagues the fastest," right?
Right.
And
Right.
the problem is he's no better today than he was on that day. Like,
Hmm.
and I mean, so he was already maybe at a more advanced level than some of the other pitchers in the draft, but there was just no projection there. Or I mean, it hasn't manifest. Obviously, I'm kind of Monday morning quarterbacking it, but just with those kind of guys that they keep taking, it's just, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a strategy that is likely to be successful, even outside of just, of course, all of the randomness that comes with the draft.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, it's just going to be very interesting to see what, how this draft shakes out this year and then to look back on it in 2 or 3 years as well and see, you know, if it panned out the way we thought it would. Because hopefully the Cardinals aren't drafting this high again for quite some time. Um,
Yeah,
Although there's no guarantees with that as they sit in the last place right now.
yeah. I was
But
gonna say we're tied for last right now, and I think the Pirates are playing now. And so if the Pirates have won by the time people listen to this, I think we're back in
yeah,
last. So
you know, yeah. That being said, you've got the Marlins, you've got the Rockies, you've got the White Sox,
you're right. We
you've
might.
got the Houston Astros. I mean, how crazy is that? The fact
Oh,
that the
right.
Astros are 7-8.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of those things though that does help you remember that it's early, right? I mean,
Yeah.
do we really think that the Astros are that bad? No. Um, Obviously, early flukiness can happen, and so you hope that that's a significant enough part of the case here that yeah, we see better things.
Well, speaking of a little bit of that kind of flukiness, I don't. Brewers are 17-8. Cubs are 17-10. This is as of when we're recording this. Um,
Yeah, but
and
the
I
Cubs,
don't want to say that.
Cubs did lose by like a football score tonight, so
That's always fun.
it is.
Um, you know, if you're ever depressed, just pull up one of those kind of games, and that'll make you feel better. But I don't, like I said, I don't think that that's fluky. I mean, we thought that these teams would be up there.
Yeah.
But do you think that maybe, especially like the Brewers, have played just a little bit better than expected, and maybe that will come back to earth, or if they, if some teams just outplay their projection all year long?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like e- everybody's going to regress to the mean. So
Yeah.
I think the Cardinals have underplayed their true talent level so far. I think, yeah, the Brewers and the Cubs, maybe overplaying theirs a little bit, but it's so few games, that it's
Hmm.
just like. So I mean, I don't see anybody yet that I'm like where I'm ready to be like, oh man, this is we were so wrong about the Cubs. We didn't see this is a 100-win team that none of us recognize. I don't see anything like that yet, but it could happen. And I think the thing that the Cardinals should be the most concerned about is that really all of the other teams in the division have some really excellent young talent, right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
those are the kind of teams where you can have that happen, is just like, you know, uh, uh, enough of that kind of young talent clicks all at once. Those are those teams that take that jump forward and going from being like oh yeah, this was maybe like a 78, 79 win team to this is a 92 win team.
Well, they really need though an infusion of leadership before they can make that jump. Um, at least I joke, but I do think that was one of the issues that I always thought about with the Reds coming into this year. They lose Votto. They've got a whole lot of guys that have only played in like a year or two, and you wonder if they don't need a little bit of that kind of seasoning maybe to help them take that next step.
Well, that could be. I only laughed. I know you said you didn't listen to our show, this most recent show, but I think Ben and I got into about a 6 hour argument about leadership in the midst of it. So I just, but it's a different than the point you're making. I'm frustrated at the way that I feel like the Cardinals have presented leadership as this like talking point around this team.
Hmm.
It,
Hmm.
it really, and it's for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest ones is just I hate speculating about leadership. It just feels like something that's like, what do we know, right?
Right. Right.
And I kind of feel like it's one of those things like, well, this team has leaders, or this team has winning players, or some of those things you see. Like, I just think all they are is like a team is winning, right? And that's that.
Mm.
And then people kind of point to those things. But I think especially with the Cardinals, it was to me, it's just been like it was almost like a PR thing. And I really think it was part of the fact that, outside of Sonny Gray, we're going to be signing Lance Lynn, and we're going to be signing Kyle Gibson. And we're even going to be bringing, Matt Carpenter back on more or less just kind of a this fell into our lap kind of thing. But it's like, well, we know these are underwhelming, right? Like, so, we can't, sit here with a straight face and tell you, just look at these numbers, right? This is why we've got this is, these are the best guys on the market, right? They know they can't do that. So leadership becomes the thing that they can kind of say like, well, these guys are going to help with our leadership. And we really needed like leadership. And again, leadership is a real thing, and personalities and things like that. I mean, they absolutely do make a difference, but we don't know, we can't see that. And I just really, for the way that this team introduced it this year, I just feel like it was a way for them to, act like there was more reason behind some of these signings than just the fact that like, look, we only spend this much on pitching, right? So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we got Sonny Gray. All we have left is enough money for a Lance Lynn and a Kyle Gibson, right? They're
Right.
not going to say that. So instead, they're going to talk about what these guys contribute from a leadership standpoint.
I think that what got to me was if you make a leadership signing, that's one thing. When you make six leadership signings,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
like who's left to lead?
Yeah.
I mean, all these guys are going to
Yeah.
be going some different direction. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
Oh, yeah. That's 100%.
Yeah. Again, and I also think that that's great and fine, but there are people that are leaders that are actually good players too.
Right.
So there is that option. Um,
Yeah, and again, it's like it's just such an invisible thing to us all, right? Like
mhm. Sure.
even like the broadcasters and stuff, you hear kind of speculating about it, and yeah, they're there and they travel with the team, and so they do have a little more of an insight than us. But it's like you just don't really know unless you're there, and it's such an
Yeah.
ethereal thing. Yeah, I just kind of it gives me the ick, Daniel. All this leadership talk, it gives me the ick.
Yeah. I mean, intangibles especially are very, very difficult, and
Oh
you're
yeah,
right. That's just one of those things that you have to be there and see how those people react. I mean, I
yeah,
wrote about it. I think at the time, it's like, okay, Matt Carpenter has a history, but he hasn't played with any of these players, or not very many of them. How
right.
much, how much cachet does he have to be a leader for these guys? And, maybe it's a lot, maybe who knows, but it also felt like, okay, well, this is a guy that y'all, the fans know, but, whether that makes an impact for Jordan Walker and Mason Wynn, who knows?
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. So, also somehow Brandon Crawford is still here, which is,
Yeah, well, it's because of his leadership, Daniel. It's
yeah. And,
leadership.
and nobody else can stand
He,
a shortstop, apparently. So,
I'll tell you, he's here because the organization counted on Tommy Edman being both the starting center fielder and the
mm,
backup shortstop, and didn't notice that there was nobody else in the organizational
yeah.
depth chart to really come in and fill those positions. And I know some people are going to also point to Dylan Carlson, but I don't think Dylan Carlson's very good, but so the Carlson injury kind of hurt as well. But that's one of the bigger indictments I think of this team and how it was built too. And one other thing I guess that like I think people kind of get on Ben and I for being anti Tommy Edman, right? But
Mhm.
Like my case has always been that they ought to use him as a utility player, meaning take advantage of the fact that he can play all of these positions. And the way you take advantage of that is you still try to have very good players at each of those positions. You know, got kind of like
Right.
starting caliber players at center field, at shortstop, at second base. And if you do that, you know, Tommy Edman is still going to get 500 plate appearances, right? Because
Right.
through injury, through load management, through all this, he's going to fill in all of those, and he's going to be better than a lot of your kind of backup caliber players. So he is tremendously valuable in that role. But again, because the organization tends to be cheap and not value depth, they instead use the fact that he can play all of these positions as an excuse to say, well, we don't need depth. We don't need depth in these places. And, you know, we're even going to, sure, Tyler O'Neill, we're going to move on from, but we're also going to move on from Richie Palacios, right? Like, we don't even need that depth. And you know, we're not. So what? We don't have anybody else to play shortstop. We're just going to keep hoping his wrist gets better by the end of spring training, and then like a week before spring training ends, when we're like, oh, we literally don't have anybody to play shortstop. Somebody get me Brandon Crawford's number, right? So, I mean, I think that's a real. I mean, honestly, I think that's the root of a lot of the just kind of roster issues here. I mean, we're going to go through a whole month of the season, and with Victor Scott and Michael Ciani, who are just sub major league caliber players in center field every single day because we have no other option.
Right. Yeah. You could say that Tommy Edman is the Mountain Lightning to Ben Zobrist Mountain Dew.
I like it. I like it. Um, we are going to take that and claim that as our own because we
Go ahead. Go
off
ahead.
off
It's my
brand
gift to you.
soda is kind of
Um,
our thing. So
but but yeah, I think that I mean I agree with you that I've definitely never understood Tommy Edmonds center fielder. That has just never made any sense to me when you have, especially when you've had other people in the organization that can play center field.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
Tommy Edman can play center field, but do we need to make the leap to Tommy Edman should play center field? No, we do
right,
not need to make that leap.
right. And it's also fascinating. I mean, again, Tommy Edmonds' health issues. I don't blame the organization because it doesn't sound like this was a thing that should have been a big deal, but it has turned out to be a big deal. And like you said, with no depth,
Yeah.
any kind of injury, you then I mean, because if he had hurt himself during the year, then what would you have
Oh, yeah, no, totally. And I think we get like we're injuries sports injuries have been dialed into such a refined science. I mean, I think we forget just because it's so consistent, like, oh, this kind of hamstring tear is this many weeks and all of this, and
done?
it's kind of shockingly accurate at this point, just the way they have that dialed in. But these are still human bodies that don't all respond the same way. And I think that's happening with Tommy Edman, is just like what, and it does feel a little vague, like they haven't, like, I don't know that it's been clearly articulated exactly what his wrist issue is. But I think partly too it's just because it's just whatever it is, or whatever, it's just not responding, right? And
Right,
so
right,
but yeah, exactly as you said, that happens. And the thing is, if they had you know uh depth at center field, at shortstop, we'd just be kind of like, oh man, it'll be nice when we get Edmund back, right? Like,
right.
but
Hmm.
instead of like, oh my gosh, we have a disaster in center field for a month.
Yeah, yeah. And it's and it's not helped the bench any, obviously, to have these kind of. I mean, you've got your third catcher because you have to. Um, I don't know, but you have to have a third catcher, and then
Yeah,
you've got Brendan Crawford, um, and
yeah.
then of
Well, and
course at some point Jimmy.
you've got Burleson, who, like,
Right.
is Burleson an outfielder really? Like, I mean, you're going to put him out there occasionally, but like, you don't want that to be a long term solution. I don't think that defense is playable out there. So
Right.
yeah,
I mean, there's a reason that they were not putting Burleson on one side and Walker on the other side of a Siani, right? I mean, that's
hmm
why Donovan's playing out there because you know you did not want that kind of. I mean, Michael Stoney's very good defensive player, but he's not going to cover that much ground.
Yeah. Well,
So
Donovan's not a very good outfielder either. Donovan's
mhm,
sub, below average outfielder for sure. Donovan kind of does well enough, and also he's the kind of
right.
guy that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. But yeah, that's certainly not an optimal place to have him.
No, and I think an ideal team would have him be your floater guy and over Tommy Edman, right? Because he has a little bit more of a bat to him, and he
Yeah,
can play a lot of the same
except
positions, although he's not as much a shortstop.
yeah, exactly. I think that's the big thing is he can't play shortstop, and Tommy Edman can legitimately play shortstop,
Right.
and truly that's the thing that makes Edmund so valuable is that most teams carry a back of their the 26th man or whatever. I mean the last position player is often the can play shortstop guy, right? Like
Right.
Jose Fermin kind of feels like maybe that would be something or
Hmm.
kind of that, right? Or um, Edmundo Sosa, that was kind of his role. I mean, we see those guys, right? And
Right.
but with Edmund, like again, if Edmund's your super utility player and your shortstop's going to be out for 2 weeks or a month, Edmund is a plus defender at shortstop, and he's a not a great hitter, a little bit below average, but you can live with that.
I mean, the Cardinals played Cesar Asturias for a whole season at shortstop, so yeah,
Yeah.
you can live with Tommy Edman's bat there for
Gold
another
Glove
night.
winner Cesar Asturias.
Exactly.
I use that one
Exactly.
on the Immaculate Grid all the time. That's a low percentage one right there. People don't remember Gold Glove winner Cesar Asturias. It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
little tip there for listeners.
That time of a different shortstop every year was kind of crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That after Eckstein left, and it just kind of rotated through. Well, as you always say, jobber after jobber, um,
That
until I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's true, but and then I don't know. I think we're about the same age, and so I know like I kind of grew up with like the same player at shortstop for 15 years, which is not
Yeah,
exactly like not the norm either. So I was probably introduced to an atypical situation at shortstop as a young man.
fair, fair enough. But that's then this generation that's currently watching baseball, grew up with the catcher at the same catcher for 15 years. So,
Yep. Yep.
if that rotates very much, at least Contreras is going to be here for a couple of years. It
That's
seems
true.
like.
Yeah. Well,
So,
unless they trade him.
which I mean, I think it's I don't know. It's a very interesting thing, right? That they didn't see. We've talked about development and all that kind of stuff, but that they didn't really see Von Herrera coming, even though he was a prospect. it,
Well,
it still feels to me if they'd seen him coming to this degree, don't you just kind of get by for a year and not sign Contreras to a long-year term deal? And then because this
well,
is a little bit awkward with him and Herrera for me at least.
yeah, I don't know. I think they're in a great situation there, frankly. And if they did what you're suggesting there, they'd be kind of doing what they've done with Edmund, right? And not having the
Yeah,
depth. You're
yeah,
really rolling the dice to say like, well, we just need to paper over for a year, and then Avon Herrera is gonna be here. So, I think no, I think it was a good thing to do. I mean, honestly I love Wilson Contreras. Like he's one of my favorite players on
hmm
this team.
yeah,
Just to watch go about his business, and he's that rare catcher that hits well enough that you actually can use him as a designated hitter, so he's got that going for him.
hmm
But yeah, to have an Ivan Herrera, and I really hope he can kind of sustain what he's doing right now. But I mean, catchers need a lot of rest anyway, right? Your backup
sure,
catcher plays kind of a lot, and so I think they're in a really good position there. I don't know if the organization ever got down on Herrera. I feel like the fans got down on him, and it's just one of those things where kind of what I think like is basically happening with Walker right now too, right? It's like
hmm
fans expect these guys to rocket through the minors and then kind of hit immediately when they get to the majors. They also have no concept of the age of these guys, right?
right,
So
right,
like the guys that like the Burleson, the Donovan types that are more like in their mid 20s when they show up. They, fans a lot of times I think lose track of that compared to your Walkers, your Herreras, some of these guys that are, get their first taste when they're like 2021. And so, Herrera, it's like he had 2 years where he had a little bit of dip in his toe in, not a lot of success. And that's enough for most fans to say like, oh, this guy's a bust. But now he's here and he's thriving. And I mean, he's 23 years old today. Like that's
Yeah.
quite young, so like he's doing well. And yeah, I think it's an exciting time, catching wise. And now we've got Pedro Pajes there too. Who I think, Dan, we could probably fit, 2 or 3 more catchers on this roster if we really set our mind to it.
Yeah. I mean, given, and we've done Bombs Away, and Herrera and Contreras have been like the big, successful ones. Maybe we just make the whole team out of catchers.
Yeah, why not?
And then maybe that'll solve the power problem that we've been seeing.
I just actually opened the MLB.com St. Louis Cardinals roster page, and
Mhm.
they have Contreras and Herrera listed in the catchers section. They have Pajes listed in the infielders section, Ben. So they may know something we don't know. Like I think
Okay.
they may be,
Wow.
gradually replacing every player, every position with a catcher. So it has begun.
Yeah. And the roster matrix default template doesn't allow for third catcher probably, and so because
Right.
nobody
Yeah.
does this.
Right. They're like,
Uh,
who on earth would construct their roster this way? This is a terrible, terrible
yeah,
idea.
yeah,
So,
you have no need for this. So
yeah.
I don't know. It is interesting, and yeah, I hopefully that Herrera does continue to do this. It's just when you do have that, the Cardinals haven't wanted to establish that DH spot as one person very much. It really feels like they like to rotate it, or they want to put a Burleson or something there. Um,
Yeah,
but
I don't
the
think it's
flexibility is probably good.
yeah, and I don't think it's just the Cardinals. It's just not like
Hmm.
DH as your position is just not a thing anymore. Pretty much every team uses it to rotate guys through to give guys that kind of little bit of rest. And again, it's just another tool for you to have depth. So it's 100% the best way to do it. I mean, I don't think you want your team to go out and sign some over the hill, guy who used to be a plus hitter to roll out there every single day and then, not be able to give an Arenado or a Goldschmidt or a Contreras or, on or a Newt Bar, not give
Hmm.
them a day where it's like if they're a little banged up or they just need a little bit of rest, say like, hey, you know what, we're going to keep your bat in today, but you don't have to play out there in the field. So yeah, I don't think we'll ever see that.
Yeah, and the Dodgers kind of did it with Otani, but that's a unicorn kind of
Well, yeah, I mean,
situation. So,
he's an
yeah,
asterisk on top of an asterisk. So
right, exactly. But yeah, I think that, and I kind of like the what the Cardinals have done with this idea of, okay, we're going to let like Goldschmidt DH a day, and then the next day he's off. So it's almost like
yeah,
a day and a half off type of thing. And then they would kind of do that with Arenado. And they've done that. I don't know if they've done it as much this year, but that's kind of been their rest pattern over the last couple of years, and
yeah.
I think it's probably been fairly effective.
Yeah, I think throughout sports we see a better understanding of the value of rest in
Hmm.
terms of preventing injuries and also just improved player performance. So I mean, I think the load management term really began in the NBA. At least that's where I kind of first heard it.
Yeah,
But you
yeah,
see it everywhere, and I think I think for the better. So
probably so. But you're right. When we grew up, and you had the Frank Thomas or the whatever that was only pretty much only DH. It's very ironic that there's everybody the DH role has expanded to overall, and then the DH idea is pretty much non-existent.
yeah, no, it really, it definitely has changed shape. Yeah, David Ortiz, you just those guys don't exist anymore.
Yeah, yeah, sure don't. All right, Ben. Well, it's been fun. And before we go down, old man lane for people, we'll try not to do that. We'll close it down for the night. Anything left to talk about, or anything you want to plug before we go?
Well, no, I think we've kind of covered everything, and I just always enjoy kind of coming on here and talking with you. Whether we're being recorded or not. So it's always a nice conversation. I suppose for folks who might be hearing me here and haven't heard our show, it's Cardinals Off Day, and we drop a new episode every off day. That's our gimmick. It's also the name of the show. So check us out.
Convenient.
And if you like us, listen to the show. And if you don't, don't listen to the show. But we appreciate people listening. We get a lot of listener questions, and often answer those. And that really makes it enjoyable for us, just to obviously know there's people listening and be able to kind of have that back and forth.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I gotta say, I think you get more of a mailbag than anybody else I have seen that puts out a call for questions or anything like that. I think y'all definitely have an audience that's interested and engaged enough to send out some questions, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, well, it really kind of blew up too. Like, I mean, we've done it for a while, and I feel like early on we'd have like maybe two or three or something, and we're definitely at the point now where I mean, it's a challenge to try to get through every question, and some weeks we can't get through every single question. So, but again, it's a nice problem to have, just because as you do these things, you write something or you record something, you kind of put it out there into the ether, and so
Yeah,
it's always nice to have feedback that people are reading or listening. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's good to talk to you this week. Next week, we're going to have Blake Newberry join us to talk about the prospects that are coming up and how that first week or first month of the minor leagues has gone. But until then, for Ben, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Pujols sends one in the air. It's deep to